Recording now, and welcome to the Executive Summit, the first edition to 2021. My name is Julia. I'm running product at Product Management Festival. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, if it's evening for you. The goal of this evening is to find out a bit more about what actually a product leader should be doing. Ken Chin has been so kind in joining us for this presentation, after which we will break out in groups, and the discussion topic for this evening will be scaling and hiring, because I've seen so many of you have challenge with that. So I hope that we manage to find out what the issues are, but also find out solutions. For my part, I will just shortly tell you what the PMF is doing. It won't take more than a few minutes. Then I will just show you a short overview of what this evening looks like. We'll try to be fast. I know that some of you have meetings still and probably want to have a dinner as well. So it's okay if you cannot attend the whole event. We'll share the recording after, and the goal is for us to do regular meetings. As you've seen, this event is an invitation only, so we really try to build a network where the seniority is at a certain level. So I know that the challenges of a product managers are different from the challenges of a product leader. So consider this a space where you can share these challenges and maybe find solutions with each other. Some of you have already attended our executive summit in November, or in the past years. Usually we did it once a year before the festival. After last year's event, I received some emails along the months, and people asking when is the next one happening. So that's why we're doing another one now. And we want to do it quarterly for a few hours. So it's usually the same people, so you can get to know each other. I know some of you already know each other from our conferences or from the PMAP program, which takes place within SAD in France. But consider this your therapy group for product leadership problems. We are here to support, so if there's anything we can do to improve this format or anything you need, just let us know. I will be sharing now a few slides. Just a bit about PMF. So we are doing actually several things. We started out with conferences, which we are running in Zurich and Singapore. Last year, of course, we had to do a virtual one. Hopefully this year we will manage to be in person again. Let's see how vaccination goes through Europe. We've planned it for 13th, 14th of September this year, and we want to do it in person with a virtual streaming worldwide. Let's see how that will go. For those of you who don't know yet, we have a product management trends and benchmarks report. We do every year a survey. We process the data, we publish it. It's for free to download, and we really encourage you to use this data to benchmark your teams, the salaries you offer your teams, and the roles you have in these teams. There's a part which really addresses product leadership challenges. The only thing we want in return is for you to fill it out, because that's actually how the report is built. Of course, with a lot of help from one of our board members, Timo from SAP, who's an expert in data analytics. He's doing the heavy lifting, but to process the data, of course, we need answers. So that's what we want from you. Otherwise, we have a lot of other meetups which are taking place virtually as well. These are more addressed to all product management levels PM nights. But we also have this meeting right here in smaller groups, 8 to 10 people maximum in different cities around the world: Zurich, Berlin, Singapore, London. So if you are in a location where there's not one and you want to start one, just reach out to us. For tonight, we're already at the intro. Next up, we will have Ken, who prepared a wonderful presentation, an overview of product leadership role. This is not a one-sided presentation, so please feel free to ask questions, interact with Ken. I'll be here to help moderate the discussion. Ken is an amazing product leader. He has a lot of experience in different companies, from eBasic, BCG. He worked in the UK, he worked in Asia. He's with PMF since many years, supporting also the community. He's really easygoing, and I'm sure that any type of challenge or question you have, you can address him and he will do his best to help you. And after that, we're going to split into groups discussing scaling and hiring. Please first introduce yourself. Where are you coming from? What's your role? What's your company? What's your location? So in case not everybody knows each other, we can already get to know us. And then we're gonna be back in the main room with the learnings and the closing. And then you can go off to your other meetings or hopefully a relaxed evening. I'm gonna switch now to Grace, my colleague Grace, who will just mention a few things about our product management executive program with INSEAD.
Thanks, Julia. So we've had the privilege at PMF to have worked with a lot of the product leaders over the years as they progress through their careers. And so one of the things that we've heard is that as they progress, it's no longer about the managing a product. It's actually become more about leadership and impact on the organization. And that is often not easily learned on the job, or not without a lot of cost and resources and time. So when we at PMF thought about how can we help the community with this, obviously we do have, as Julia mentioned, the conferences and the community events. We have these executive summits, but we thought we could do something with more structure, a little bit more vigorous, academic, if you will. And so we partnered with INSEAD, as Julia mentioned, for a 5-day executive level program. And that is held on INSEAD's campuses. And the idea is that we have an INSEAD professor who would teach, and actually it's Noah Askin for many of you who might have already met him or heard him speak. So Noah is our program director, and he and his colleagues at INSEAD teach for 3 of those days on leadership topics. And then we have 4 guest lecturers who are actually product leaders within their own organizations that come in and speak on product specific topics. I think Noah actually is on our call today. And so Noah, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to it.
I'm here, yes. Hi, everyone. Nice to see friendly, familiar faces, current and former guest faculty, current and former students, participants. I normally would give a longer spiel, except my entire family has been recovering from COVID for the last 2 weeks. So I'm a little underprepared with life at the moment, or behind, I should say. Everyone's fine. But good to see everyone. And many of you are familiar with the program already. 5 days, really focusing, at least my angle and the way that I designed it and think about it is focusing on the people side of things. You know, Andrew wrote people becoming your product, and that's very much kind of the mentality that I had when designing it. And so it's a focus on communication, on leadership development, on dealing with multiple stakeholders, getting pulled in lots of different directions, dealing with where product sits in the organization and what that means for your ability to get things done or get stifled when you're trying to get things done. And then, I step gracefully out of the way and let people like Giovanni step in and talk about their experience as product leaders throughout their history. Ken was signed up to teach in Singapore in a program that never quite happened, but it will totally happen, Ken. And Nazreen, who I saw here, is going to be teaching in May, and Ayman is a friend of the program from INSEAD as well. So, we bring in people who have, like yourselves, who have lots and lots of experience and really touch on the nuts and bolts of products about which I would be well out of my pay grade, it's well above my pay grade. So I focus on the leadership and people side, and then we bring in some expertise and experience for the real product nuts and bolts. And as several of you, and I see Tati there, can attest to, I think it's a pretty successful. It's been a pretty successful program so far, and really
And
filling
you
the
are an
kind of,
awesome teacher.
oh, thank you. I did not put her up to saying that. It's I think it's really filling a niche in the marketplace, in that a lot of people coming up the ranks in product just haven't had the experience managing, dealing with these tricky beings, these tricky products known as humans. And so that's really what we're there to try to solve. So happy to answer questions. I'm mostly going to sit here and listen to what Ken has to say, because I'm actually quite interested. And nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Noah. So for any of you who might be interested, or someone in your network who might be interested in this, feel free to reach out to us at PMF or pmep.education for more information. And as you can see, we have a few programs that are coming up.
Good. Thank you both. And really, really thank you, Noah. We really hope for a speedy recovery for all your family. And thanks so much for being with us even in these hard conditions. Good. So that's it from our side. Up next is Ken. Thank you so much, Ken, for joining us. I'm really looking forward to your presentation and to find out what a product leader should do, and especially what a product leader shouldn't do. So I'm curious about that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. It's a pleasure to be here. Really great to see everyone attending these sorts of events as well. So really happy to be doing this. All right, let me start off with sharing my screen. It's a pretty simple presentation today. I only have 2 slides, but I also have a rather complex mind map as well that I'm going to take you through. Okay. So, all right, so this is me. This is a little bit of a page about what we're doing today. So a few things about me. I'm a big hiker, love hiking, getting out into the open spaces. In October 2019, I did the Annapurna circuit in Nepal. That was about 300 kilometers. I'm hoping to do the Appalachian Trail at some point in the US, and that's 3,500 kilometers, so I think only 10 times more. But I love that sort of stuff. As Julia said, I'm a product leader for many, many years now. I really learned sort of all of my basic product management craft at eBay. I was with eBay for 9 years. Spent a couple of years at BCG Digital Ventures, building corporate startups. And then I was more recently the Chief Product Officer at Seek Asia, which is an employment marketplace in 7 different markets in Southeast Asia. Something that's also very true about me is I'm starting to get pretty old. So I just turned 50 last year. I am starting to forget stuff. I think I've got early onset dementia or something, I'm sure of it. And so I've had to start writing things down so I don't forget things. And one thing that I realize is that actually, as I start to write stuff down, you know, people are asking me about it, I'm referring to my notes, and I'm saying, hey, actually, this might be quite useful for other people to share with as well. So So that's the topic for today. I'm sort of visually mapping out the role of a product leader. I'm trying to keep it as a simple structure as possible. And as I do that, I'm sort of mentioning some of the more useful and common frameworks that I'm using and some of the resources that I'm using to help guide some of my thinking about some of these particular areas of being a product leader. And so the reason why I'm doing that is there are a number of benefits. So particularly around the frameworks, right? I love a good framework. I have a very structured approach to how I coach my team and how I solve problems. And so having a good framework just gives you a big advantage in terms of how you approach things. And there's really four kind of key areas, right? So one is it just helps you solve problems better. You can better articulate the problem. It helps to frame the problem and help you think through all of the different dimensions of tackling that problem. It's also really great for coaching, right? So as you have team members that are coming to you, they're facing particular problems. It's really useful if you can give them a framework to go away and think about it, and then say, hey, look, go and use this particular framework, come back to me, and then we'll discuss the content and some of the options that you've discovered by working through it. I also find that by using sort of industry standard frameworks or commonly accepted frameworks, it's more easily adopted and accepted by the organization and people. They are just less resistant to it if it's something that other people are using and it's quite well known. And the other thing is that there's just lots of existing resources. Like you don't have to make up your own manuals or explain yourself on your own personal framework around something. There's just plenty of books and lectures and videos out there already. It's also much easier to scale across the organization. This is something that I did when I was at Seek Asia. We started using a lot of common frameworks to tackle different types of problems that we faced on a regular basis. And so it was much easier to scale by using those common frameworks, and teams became much more efficient because they became proficient in using those frameworks. They were all using the same one, so they could all talk about things together using those same frameworks as well. And as I mentioned before, there's plenty of existing resources. It's really nice where you don't have to explain yourself. And you can say, hey, here's a link to a YouTube video, and you can just go and watch that for 10 minutes. And then, we'll talk about some more of the details later. There's also a lot of personal benefits to this as well. So one, it builds your personal authority as an expert, especially when you can name specific frameworks and you're well-versed in how to use them. It also develops your playbook as a product leader. So no matter what problems come your way, whether it's something that your CEO is struggling with, and you might be able to provide some advice or some ways of helping him with a product, or him or her with a product, or whether it's just something that a problem that you're dealing with day to day as part of your role. It's also super useful that I found using job interviews, right? So just having it up on my screen when I'm answering job interview questions, that's actually really useful as well. So there's another personal benefit as well. So that's the end of the 2 slides. What I'm going to do now is actually take you through this sort of visual mapping that I've done, and to give you a bit of a view of like just how big it is. There's quite a different few pieces. Some of them are fairly basic stuff that you would probably already know, but some of it I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, particularly around organizational leadership and organizational transformation. And so the way, actually, I'm going to pause here for now. So, Yulia, are there any questions so far?
Not for right now, but
Okay.
if anybody wants to ask a question, you can either speak or type it in, and I'll address it to Ken, and we can make it interactive as we go.
Absolutely. Feel free to ask questions. I'll pause every once in a while and answer a few that are relevant, and then we'll have more questions at the end. So I sort of segment my role as a product leader into 4 key areas. That's what I've come up with so far. You might be able to, to categorize things in slightly different ways, but I sort of see it as 4 key areas. So one is around organizational leadership. The second is around organizational transformation. The third is around delivering and driving customer outcomes. And the fourth one is around driving business outcomes. Right. So at a very, very high level, that's kind of what I see the role as doing. And obviously each of those areas breaks down into much more detail. I think as you start off as a product manager, you're very much focused on customer outcomes. So you're an associate product manager or fairly junior in the organization. You tend to be focusing on things like what are people's customer needs, what is the value proposition of your products, what does the experience look like. And so there's a whole bunch of existing, well documented sort of ways of thinking about segmentation, personas. There's different research methods that you've got here. There's also different ways of understanding what the customer problem is, as well as who is your customer, right? So there's jobs to be done, for example. I tend to use that one because it specifically calls out emotional needs of the customer, and I think that often gets skipped. And so there's a whole bunch of books that you're probably familiar with as well. This one's fairly new, Jim Kalbach. I worked with Jim when I was back at eBay. He's written a book on jobs to be done. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard lots of good reviews, so it's actually on my reading list. So that's customer outcomes. I think most of us are familiar with that sort of stuff. There's also business outcomes. This is predominantly around metrics, just understanding what's actually going to drive the business outcomes you're looking for. Go to market and growth, and then strategic defensibility is kind of another topic that I've sort of started to break out. These are not complete. There's a lot more that I haven't sort of documented in here. But I wanted to focus more of my time on the top 2, which is around organizational leadership and organizational transformation. When I think through all the things that I used to do as Chief Product Officer for Seek Asia, there were quite a number of things that I kind of knew that I needed to do, but didn't quite expect them to take up so much time. And so I'll go through each of these. One of them is around being a member of the executive leadership team. It's surprising how much you need to actually spend time with the other leaders of the organization to either provide other people with advice on what's happening within products, aligning between different functions so that we can work towards common goals, and then just managing other stakeholders. Particularly the CEO, they're always very demanding. That's their job. So being part of that team actually takes up quite a bit of time. Setting and communicating the context. So, understanding the company, the mission, strategy, how do we play, how do we win, what's the competitive context, communicating the direction. So, what is our product vision, objectives, product strategy, providing some guidance and guardrails around how people should operate, particularly around prioritization, right? So high-level prioritization, absolutely key there. Modeling behavior. So that's one that's often overlooked. People will start to model your behavior within the organization as well. So you need to be super careful about what you're saying, what you're doing, the way that you're approaching conflict, for example. Some of the things you're trying to do is to drive greater autonomy in the organization. You're trying to help people work through delivering outcomes rather than just activities and outputs, and providing that kind of psychological safety as well. So I find that modeling behavior was a part of the role that I hadn't really tweaked on it at the time, but it's certainly very important. The other one is providing air cover, right? So as the product leader, a lot of the accountability stops with you. And so you are able to delegate that downwards towards your team, but you need to give them the air cover in order to do that. Sometimes there will be other stakeholders or other senior leaders that might get in the way, might be quite demanding and getting in the way of teams getting things done. They might also exhibit some what I call anti-pattern behavior, things that are actually quite disruptive to the behavior of the teams, or not modeling the right kind of behavior for the teams. And sometimes you're going to have to take a hit. This is something that I totally found as a chief product officer as well. If something does go wrong, you're going to have to take a hit. You have to take accountability of any mistakes that are made and take ownership of any resolution as well. Another piece of this is inspiring others. So two things that I found helpful when I was sort of thinking about this was Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And there's also another book called The Power of Vulnerability. This is very much about sort of being very authentic, written by Brene Brown. And she's got a great TED Talk if you've never seen it as well, about vulnerability. And so, so there's a couple of good resources to think of. The other key area that is part of your role, and it's a very, very important part of your role as a leader, is to develop other leaders in the organization, right? So who are the emerging leaders within your teams? How do you coach them and develop them so that they become leaders in their own right as well? And so I use a coaching framework called GROW. That's quite common as a coaching framework. That's really useful. I think what you'll find is that many of the people within your teams may never have had a leader who was also previously a competent product manager, right? I've consulted to many organizations where the CPO comes from a completely different background to product management, right? And they have no way of knowing how to coach their teams, right? That's very, very common, surprisingly common. And so your team members may never have been given the frameworks to solve product management problems. They might never have had a great role model in terms of product leadership. They may have many blind spots in terms of their gaps in their knowledge. And so one of the key things that you need to be doing is put them on the path to learning, right? I've coached many product managers outside of my own organization, and I'm quite regularly surprised how much they don't know about common sort of product management frameworks for solving these sorts of challenges. And so that is a really key part of your role. And the most common things that I get asked about when I'm coaching people is these 4 areas. So one of them is about leadership, right? One of the things that I tell my reports is that, in the past, you've been a skilled product manager, but you need to become a student of leadership in this way that you became a student of product management, right? So there are some great books on just general leadership that are out there. 2 that I recommend there's another one by Brene Brown called Dare to Lead. That's really quite useful from a sort of behavioral and psychological perspective, becoming a confident leader and knowing how to think about leadership. And there's another one which is really useful as well. It's by a submarine commander in the US Navy called David Marquet. And the book is called Turn the Ship Around. Strategy, there's some really common stuff that I use for strategy. Innovator's Dilemma is also really useful. There's a great blog, Stratechery by Ben Thompson, that I read on a regular basis. And then Lean Canvas is actually the framework that I use for doing product strategy, right? So it's a really nice structured way of thinking through product strategy as well. The other 2 areas are around people management and the craft. And there's some great resources out there. Radical Candor was written by Kim Scott a few years ago, but it's a really great framework for helping people become confident people managers. It's something that I agreed with a lot of the principles in her book even before she wrote the book. But now that she's written it, it's just so useful to be able to refer to it and walk other people through the same sort of approaches. So it's just a great resource for managing people. Empowered, written recently published by Marty Kagan, and his earlier book Inspired is another great book, just about the basics of product management in terms of the craft as well. So that is sort of the leadership, organizational leadership dimension of this mind map. Any other questions at this point? No? Okay.
Tati was asking if we have access to the content. For sure, we'll share the recording, and if you can share the content, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share the content of this.
And
I'm pretty sure Miro can handle the traffic.
Leland, would you like to ask the question?
Sure, I can. Good to see you again. So I mean, this is a very cool constellation of things, and some are probably more urgent than others at different times in your career. But where have you had the most struggle, where you found the most first aid, let's say, from one of these?
Yeah, I think it's been around these areas here. So when you become more senior in an organization, like you've got the product management craft down, by that stage. And so you're really confident about that stuff. But when you walk into a chief product officer role, there's a lot of things that you've never done before, especially around the leadership team setting and communicating the context and direction. Like you've seen other leaders do it, but you've never had to actually do it yourself. And so that's probably where I had the biggest struggles.
And what helped you through those struggles? I mean, in many cases you have reference points, but what helped you through these ones?
Yeah, so obviously reading a lot, learning a lot from other people. I have my own peer group of other product leaders that I speak to on a regular basis. So we have a regular, almost therapy session, and we talk about some of the very similar struggles that we have, right? Particularly around managing senior stakeholders, whether it's the CEO or other C-suite executives, or people on the board, right? You might have had exposure to the board before, but you've never had to be in the hot seat, when they're asking you questions and really challenging some of your thinking around the strategy.
Good. We have another question from Helen. Helen, do you want to ask your question live?
Hi, sure. Hi, Leland. I didn't recognize you. Yeah, my question is basically, you mentioned, right, that a lot of product managers, they may not have someone from the field, and I would confirm that often it's the case. So do you think it makes you, or it makes someone a better leader to be actually from the craft?
In my experience, it has been, because you can develop this area much more easily. Like if you're helping to develop other leaders and developing their craft, then it's just much easier if you can if you've had that experience before yourself, right? So I found not only does that help you build confidence in your leadership and confidence in your team, but it also builds trust with your team as well. Like you're seen as someone who can really help them in terms of developing their careers. And so having that that previous product management experience means that you can coach much more effectively.
So I would have a follow-up question, which is, because that my experience is also, it was always difficult to make the jump to a leadership position, right? And often what I heard, and also what a lot of my peers heard, were basically, yeah, you're excellent product managers, but it's very different to be a product leader, right? Which, yeah, is true. But exactly, having this, knowing the job, I think can makes you better. So how did you convince, when you make the first jump, or maybe in your first roles, how did you argue, right? And say, no, because I'm coming from there, like I have value, and the rest will.
Yeah, so my last role was the first time that I had been the chief product officer, and so it was my first time as you know, the most senior product leader within the organization. I think I was lucky in that the organization was at a level of maturity where they still valued a lot of that that product management capability, because the existing teams were relatively immature. And so being able to come in into the organization and do all of that kind of coaching, setting up all of the processes, the practices, the culture, and doing that kind of organizational transformation was something that was really valuable to the organization. And so, yeah, having that product management background just gave me the confidence to be able to do that.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So actually, that's a really great segue into the next sort of section of this.
We have some more questions. Wait.
Okay, sure.
So, Patrick Tsao, would you like to ask your question as well to Ken?
Sure. Good to see you again, Ken. I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about organizational leadership, what the scope of the product leader's responsibilities are. Is it just within your own product team, or is it the product development team overall, or is it influencing company-wide things? I'm asking because I had issues where I was doing more than like the HR standard stuff, and then it actually kind of like pissed off the COO in the past, because I was like, quote unquote, out of line, like not following procedure.
Okay.
So how do you think about that?
So I was obviously in, so the scope of my role at Seek Asia, I was responsible for the product management team. I was responsible for the design team, as well as the data analytics team, right? So I had 3 of those teams reporting to me. I was not directly responsible for the engineers and developers, right? So there was a CIO/CTO who was responsible for all of the engineering function. But we paired effectively together. In fact, you know, his name was Dan. He was one of the key reasons why I actually joined Seek Asia, is because I wanted to work with him, because he and I had very, very similar approaches in terms of how we wanted the organization to operate. And so being able to pair really closely with the CTO meant that we effectively co-led the product delivery organization. So he would often talk to my product managers. I would often talk to his heads of engineering. Does that sort of answer your question, or were you looking for a slightly different angle on that?
It kind of does. I'm actually wondering, let's go a little bit more extremely outside of product development. And so like, let's say, you know, I have certain training in place for the people who I want to develop into leads that I run every month. And that is not like an HR standardized thing. And so HR comes and says, why are you building management training? Because I share everything I make with them. And
right.
So they feel like it should be an HR function to build management training, but they weren't doing it. And so I did it for my team.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because I was trying to do a good thing, but I didn't feel appreciated.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the organization. So in the case of Seek Asia, none of that was there. Right, all very, very basic training was there. And so for things like HR training, things like performance management, essentially the CIO and I collaborated on setting a standard in terms of our expectations, our training curriculum, all of the level expectations for the product delivery group. And we had a HR business partner who worked with us on that. And so if it's not already there, then I would say that it is part of your role to be pushing for better resources, better training, better standards. Even just to communicate those expectations is something that's not done very often, right? So I would definitely say that that is part of your role if it's not already there.
Thank you.
Good. Next question. Is it okay if we take some more questions, Ken?
Yeah, sure.
So we have
back.
Tobias. Tobias, I see you have a question about the GROW framework.
Yeah, hi Ken, good to see you again. And yeah, my name is Toby from Switzerland. I'm working with an e-commerce company in Switzerland where we are scaling rapidly, and therefore there is a need that we empower people towards product leaders, and that's why I just am curious about the GROW framework, and if you could share a bit more of your experience with it, maybe just one example where you empowered a product leader, something like a head of product or something, to at least to build something around him that he will be able to do such things.
Yeah, so I'll quickly talk through the framework itself. So GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and will, right? So I can point you in, I'll add some links to some videos about the GROW framework. There's plenty of online resources about how to use this for coaching. It's a very generalized coaching framework as well. So it can be used for anything, not specifically for product management. And it's really about sort of helping people be clear and be able to clearly articulate what their goals are, what their current status is, what are the options, and then what kind of choices are they able to make. And so that's the very basics GROW framework. To give you more of an example of how I used it, particularly with one of my senior leaders, I had a design leader in my Hong Kong office, relatively new as a product manager, as a people manager. To some degree, had a little bit of guilt about being promoted above her peers into the role, and so faced some challenges around, being able to confidently manage a team. But actually, she was a natural at it. She just needed to be coached into the right way of thinking about managing her team. And so, one of the things that I did was to have one-on-one coaching calls with her, either every week or every couple of weeks, so that we could talk through some of the challenges that she was facing, and I can give her some ways of thinking about how to manage people, right? Particularly, the book Radical Candor was a great way of thinking about how to manage people. So there's two dimensions in this framework. One is about care personally, and the other one is challenging directly. So this is kind of the radical candor. I used to call it tough love, right? So like you really care about your people, but you are also just really direct with them about, about feedback, about how they're doing, and what they can do to improve.
Cool, thanks a lot.
Great. All right, I'm gonna hold questions for the time being, but hopefully we've got more time for doing that later as well. There's another
absolutely.
There's another section of this which I haven't talked about yet. So you remember I talked about the 4 different areas. These 2 you're probably familiar with. That's just product management stuff. Organizational leadership I've talked about. Organizational transformation is something that's also just really tough, right? There is always dysfunction in every organization that I've been in, right? there is no such thing as the perfect organization. And so you're always thinking about, right, how do I resolve some of that conflict, or how do I resolve some of the dysfunction within the organization and improve the level of maturity of that organization towards better ways of working. And so some of the things that I looked at doing were sort of quite radical in terms of the organization as well. I did a complete reorg of the team structures while I was at Seek Asia. And so I can walk you through some of the challenges there as well. But essentially, you know, some of the big problems that I had was that, I think about the product delivery group in terms of the delivery quality. You know, what are the different aspects of that? The delivery capability, the velocity and capacity. That's a lot to do with hiring, and as well as their ability to innovate, right? So, so you can break those down into other pieces. I haven't completely mapped out what all of those are, but there are some pieces here, particularly around hiring. I spent a lot of time as a product manager just hiring new people into the organization. Talent acquisition is super important. I think it's one of the most important things you do as a leader. The other part is around ways of working. So there's all the common stuff around performance management, particularly around behaviors. So you should be looking at performance evaluation based on 2 dimensions. So one is around what is their impact, so what have they been able to achieve, but the other dimension is also their behaviors. How have they actually delivered all of those outcomes? And so sometimes you will get a person who's a bit of an asshole, right? And they deliver great stuff, but they burnt a lot of bridges, they annoyed the hell out of everyone along the way. And so, you know, having to have a conversation about them, about their behaviors is something that's should be built into your product, into your performance management system. Working in teams, all that teaming stuff, I won't cover that too much. I'm sure you guys are familiar with those sorts of things. In terms of organization structure, there's a couple of things that are really useful here. There's a book called Team Topologies that's super useful. You might recognize this from the Spotify YouTube videos. I know that they hate to call it a model, but a lot of people do model their organizations off Spotify. And so I just regard it as a good example of the principles in this book around team topologies. Just having cross-functional teams is actually, sometimes organizations just don't. I was doing some consulting work very recently with a publicly listed company, very successful. They just don't have cross-functional teams. Like, it's just amazing how many organizations are still like that. This is Conway's Law as well. Conway's Law is something that I'm very familiar with. Whenever you're thinking of changing the structure of an organization, you're also going to impact the architecture of all of your systems, right? Because there's a very strong link between the organization structure and the architecture of your software. And so that can be used to really great effect. If you actually want to change the architecture, you can actually change the organization structure. And by doing so, if you design it well, you can force change on the software architecture as well. And so Conway's Law is something that lots of people are familiar with, but not, actually there are many people who are not familiar with Conway's Law and how it's used as well. So if you can get your head around this, it's a super powerful tool when you're looking at the organization structure for your teams. Great. The other aspect of organizational transformation is really around just developing the capabilities. So I call it the craft, but it's just all of the core product management skills that you would expect. And so up here, I also have another section around just the product management function. I split it into 2 big pieces. I'm sure there's more, but I have one around product strategy. So this is around customer discovery. So this Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, that's useful sometimes if you've got a very new product that's entering a market. As I mentioned before, I use Lean Canvas for product strategy as my core framework. And then actually within the Lean Canvas, I use a whole bunch of other tools to help fill in each of these boxes, right? So you could do like empathy mapping for customer segments. You could do jobs to be done for, defining what their problem is. This icon, this is the Amazon. Amazon has this methodology where they sort of work backwards and they do a press release by starting their development with a press release about the product so that you can clearly define the value proposition before you actually start going out and build it. Right. So there's a whole bunch of frameworks within this framework that I use for filling out each of these boxes. So that's around strategy. Product discovery is another big piece. There's a lot happening at the moment with sort of better models for product discovery. And then I mentioned this other resource, Stratechery, by Ben Thompson. Really great blog about tech strategy. This stuff around product management, you probably already know. It's things like prioritization models. My favorite one is RICE. The reason why I like RICE is because it calls out confidence as one of the dimensions of the prioritization. And so you might have a CEO that's super confident about this amazing idea that he or she has, but the rest of the team is kind of, I really don't know if that's going to work. And so the prioritization model builds in a mechanism for you to push back based on the level of confidence that you have. And it's just a great way of having a conversation with different stakeholders about why something was prioritized and why it was not. All of this other stuff you should probably know, right? There's the standard stuff that you would do as a senior person in product management. I've started implementing roadmaps which are based on now, next, and later rather than timelines. And I've also tried to define them as problems rather than a set of features to deliver. But that's really hard. Like I've tried several times to do that in different organizations, and other people just don't buy into it. Like stakeholders just do not buy into this. And so I haven't found a good way of really communicating the value of doing it this way to other people. I can communicate it, they just don't get it. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears around this one. Another interesting model is this one called I think it's called the 3X model by Kent Beck. This is explore, expand, and extract. So it's just looking at the maturity of each product along this pathway. And so your behavior of the product manager and the teams might actually need to change a little bit as you move from one of these sort of phases to the next. Sometimes actually you can do a handover. Like sometimes there is a specific explore team that does lots of innovation, and they hand over to a team that's ready to help it scale, or you add other expertise to help it scale at that stage. I try to avoid handovers, but then sometimes it's unavoidable. And then horizon planning is something that most other leaders are familiar with this. So yeah, if you introduce horizon planning, they'll be comfortable with that. Way more comfortable than the now, next, later approach. Cool. All right. Yeah. So that sort of covers the high level frameworks that I use as a product leader. And as I mentioned before, as you get more senior, you start to get much more involved in the leadership aspects, and you get much more involved in the organizational transformation aspects of this as well. So yeah, so hopefully you found that useful. As I said, this is super useful when you're coaching, when you're problem solving with your team members, or when you're sitting in an interview trying to get a job. It's really useful as well. Cool. All right. Let's go on with some more questions.
Good. Thank you so much, Ken. It's super useful, and I think it's study material for years to come. Thank you for putting in the effort to building this. I think it's wherever you are in your product leadership journey, you will find a place to start and grow.
I'd really encourage all of you guys to do something similar. I mean, I'm happy to share this as well, but yeah, as you actually build your own, you actually become quite confident about your own playbook as a product leader and in being able to solve different types of problems.
Good. Amadia has a question for a topic from before. Amadia, would you like to ask your question live? Her question is how to take a hit gracefully.
I don't know if there is. So when I think back at my experience, it's like there comes a point in a time in a meeting where everyone's looking at each other saying, somebody really screwed up. Whose fault is this, right? And if it's in your domain as a product leader, you just got to own up to it. I used to say, that's on me. I'll sort that out. And it doesn't do wonders for your career. But I think people also start to develop a trust around working with you, that you will take accountability when things screw up. There's no good way, graceful way of doing it. So
basically, it's things will go wrong. The only thing you can do is actually take responsibility for it. And
yeah, it's absolutely right.
Good. Daniel has a question. Daniel, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Ken. Nice to see you again, and amazing presentation. I think we could have stopped on organizational leadership and spent like 2 hours talking there. And my question, I talked to one of a CPO friends that I know, and she said that I consider my product organization as my product, and I'm a PM of that. So I apply all my knowledge as a PM to grow the teams and the processes and so on. And I wanted to see what you think about it, and if you follow the same idea and maybe apply some of the PM techniques to product org within your company.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But my one caution is that it's not the only thing that you do, right? So I totally agree. Like when you're transforming the organization to become a better organization that can deliver better products for your customers, you should take that approach. You are the product manager of your organization, absolutely. But just don't forget about all this other stuff.
Good. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Flax.
Hi, Ken. This is Jeremy from Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you. I think this is brilliant stuff, and I'm just glad that your memory's failing so that you're writing it all down. I'm very thankful for that. One of the comments you said earlier, which was quite insightful, was most product managers have never had a leader who was also a competent product manager. And I saw a lot of smiles, lots of smiles in the audience. So my question was, where do you, I've experienced this challenge of now, I was a product person, well, a product manager who grew into an exec role. And where do you think the greatest conflict lies in modeling behavior as an exec leader versus modeling behavior as a product person inherently? You've grown up as a product person, you love product, you're passionate about product, you believe that there's constraints. So where have you seen the greatest conflicts in those different ways to model behavior, and how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, it's just really tough, right? This was probably the worst when I was at BCG Digital Ventures, right? The Digital Ventures team was awesome. They were amazing people, but we had to work with a lot of the strategy consultants as well, right? And we just have very, very different views about how to approach problems. So if you come from a traditional management background, you're probably more familiar with the strategy consulting way of doing things, which is, I've got the answer, let's do it this way. They're very action oriented. They're very date oriented as well, right? So let's do this thing by this date and sort of and take that approach. Whereas I think most digital teams have to deal with a lot more uncertainty. We're really not sure if that is actually the best plan to move forward. And so the way that different people deal with risk and manage risk is chalk and cheese, right? And so I think that's probably the biggest area where I've had the biggest conflict is in how do you actually manage risk? So actually that's up here somewhere. Key risks, right? So this is from Marty Kagan, right? He clearly identifies four key risks. So value risk, right? Is it actually going to be useful to the customer? Usability risk, feasibility risk, mostly around technical feasibility, and then viability risk around, is this actually going to help the business? And I found that this was a really useful framework for just helping have a conversation about risk with other managers and other leaders, because they've never really thought about risk in this way. And so that was super useful for me as a framework for having those conversations and explaining the reason why we do things the way we do things is because we are managing these different types of risks, right? So I'll give you an example. A lot of people push back at, user research, right? Waste of time. Let's just do this, right? I know the customer. I'm sure they're going to love that feature, right? And so not doing user research increases your value risk. You don't even know if customers want it. And it also increases usability risk because you don't know if they're actually going to be able to use it. And so by using this kind of risk framework, you can talk about the value of doing product discovery. You can talk about why agile iteration is a better way than doing things as a waterfall. And so, yeah, so this is kind of key for me.
That's great. No, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Cool. Next question comes from Marisa. Marisa, would you like to join our conversation?
Yes, hi Ken, nice to see you again. Thanks for the talk, and I have immense FOMO over your Miro board. I must make one for myself immediately. So thanks for inspiring that. So yeah, here's my question. Actually, it's in anticipation of a new product manager joining my team in a couple of weeks. So it turns out that in my career, I've had much more experience managing designers or developers, and this has gone pretty well for me, even though I don't have necessarily the exact expertise for that. But on the few occasions in the past where I had PMs reporting to me, it like went horribly wrong. Like I lost friends, people quit, I quit, there were tears, like it was the worst thing ever. And really, like, I want to make sure that, it works out with this new PM. We're also going to be hiring a second one. So if anyone has referrals, please send them my way. But basically, we're intending to have 2 product people reporting to me in the next couple of months. I just want to make sure that I get off on the right foot. So if you have any tips on, I guess, how to do it, or how things to avoid, or pitfalls, any advice is welcome.
Yeah, sure. So, I was a terrible manager when I first was a manager. Like if I think back to the days where I first became a people manager, I was horrible at it. I was micromanaging, I was date fixated, I was a really bad manager. So we've all been there, right? We all learn as we go through it. I think having great leaders that you can model after is super important. I mentioned this book, Radical Candor. I'm not sure if you've read that before. Where is it? Here.
Yeah, it's a great book. I have read it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's lots of advice in there around, you know, setting up your one-on-ones, how to do really great coaching, how do you build trust. And so, yeah, I would look at, I think it's chapter 7 or chapter 8 of that book, where it actually helps walk you through step by step some of the things that you can do with a brand new, you know, report.
Great, thanks a lot.
Good. Time for one last question before we start our discussion groups. Helen has another question. Helen, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. So basically, it's just to bounce on the what you said around, for example, explaining user research, product discovery. So let's say I'm familiar with the situation, and so I'm looking for advice about how to explain this to the CEO of the company where you're in, right? When you want to explain, you want to justify your hiring of a design team.
Right, yeah. So it does come back to that risk framework again, right? So one thing that CEOs understand is, is risk, right? Because actually at the board level, they have a risk register, right? They talk about risk all the time. And so if you introduce him to a new risk framework that is specifically about product, then you can explain the risk, the different types of risks, and then you can explain what the solution is to minimize that type of risk. And particularly around hiring a user designer or a UX designer or a user research team, it is very specifically around reducing the amount of value risk and the amount of usability risk. Yeah, so I found this framework extremely helpful in terms of managing stakeholders.
Okay, so you used it in the past and it worked, so you got a buy-in.
Yeah. So they buy into the risk argument, right? Because if you don't manage these risks, we could end up wasting 3 months of a team's time building something that nobody really wants or uses, right? And you can validate that by the data that you have, right? So if you're using A/B testing, or if you're doing any sort of data analytics, then you could say, hey, look, we don't want that other project to happen again. You know, that horrible project that went wrong in the past that nobody uses. We don't want that to happen again. So talk about risk first, set up a framework, set up that conversation, and then you can talk about different methodologies for reducing it. Yeah, they definitely get that.
Thank you. I'll try.
Cool.
Good. So for the ones who are still here, I'll split in groups. Please, when you join a group, introduce yourselves, where you're coming from. And the topic for today would be scaling and hiring. What is your current challenge and what have you found that works? We do that for 10 minutes. We'll be back here to learn from what you've spoken, what you exchanged, and then we're closing the session. So I'll send you to the groups now.